Australia has a national emergency, according to Prime Minister John Howard. A recent inquiry found child sexual abuse to be rampant in Aboriginal communities, and the solution, says Howard, is to seize complete control of those communities in the Northern Territory. Alcohol and pornography will be banned. It's a land grab, say critics, another paternalistic solution imposed on the Indigenous communities by Canberra. I'm Taimur Nabili, and on this edition of 101 East, we look at the biggest shake-up of Australia's Aboriginal policy in decades. The backlash against Howard's tough measures began almost immediately, and already the government has been forced to clarify some of the more contentious proposals. Chan Tao Cho went to Australia to witness the storm brewing in the Northern Territory.
You know the sun and the moon and the stars up in the sky. You see the mountain and the flowers and the trees. You see the river.
My name's Bob Randall, and I'm one of the listed traditional owners for this beautiful rock we call Uluru, which has been in the care of my people now for many generations. I live in the Mudijulu community, which is just on the other side of Uluru.
Mudijulu is one of more than 70 Aboriginal communities in the Northern Territory. Bob Randall is one of its elders among the population of about 200. He used to run its health clinic until the government recently took control over community affairs.
We've been classified as unable to manage our own affairs and been put under administration. As far as child abuse goes, it's certainly been overstated in our community. What I didn't like, they're only categorising us as the ones who are the perpetrators. It's got to go right across the board, in the white communities, in every community.
G'day! How are you, mate? How are you?
Indigenous Affairs Minister Mel Bruff has been at the front line of the Australian government's emergency intervention. The measures to be introduced include health checks for children, alcohol ban in communities, and control over Aboriginal parents' use of their welfare funds. This in a way that they will only receive the full amount of money if their children attend school and if they spend a substantial amount of it on daily necessities.
I take you back to the Little Children Are Sacred report, which sadly indicated that of 45 communities that report's authors visited, 45 had sexual predators operating in them.
Well, it was a very good meeting. You know, government's here to help, but, you know, put the politics away. We are losing our people, for goodness sake, and we are burying young people through alcohol. So that's what they asked the government. You know, government's got the power to stop it.
But reaction has been mixed. Mario Giuseppe, whose father is Italian, is a council member in Mudijulu and a fierce critic.
Maybe it's election year. We've been screaming out for help from the government for the last 20 years, but they've been falling on deaf ears all the time. And when the government does come say, we'll do it our way. It's always their way. It's not the community's way or the people's way, it's their way. And that's why a lot of their policies have failed in the past.
I had to check the sound because he was quiet about it.
Part of the dissent comes from the federal government's plan to remove the need for a permit in order to access Aboriginal communities. Other than protecting the people from the prying eyes of the public, this permit was also supposed to be a substitute for police presence.
It hasn't protected the children, it hasn't protected them when they've been dry from grog coming in or from drugs. Let's get proper policing and get rid of the fraud which has been perpetrated on the communities in the form of a permit system.
Another controversy surrounds the government's plan to take over Aboriginal land on a 5-year lease, with a view to a possible 99-year lease at the end of it.
We own our own private businesses. Are they going to take over our private businesses too under this control?
By leasing back under just terms for 5 years, I can, in one foul sweep, start addressing the issues of housing, maintenance of homes, rental, all of the conditions, maintaining water systems, sewage systems, without having to wait weeks, if not months, to get approvals to do these things.
Alison Anderson is a member of parliament in the Northern Territory. She recently visited the Ikunji community to help them make sense of the government's plans.
I'd really like to see the Commonwealth start putting a dollar figure on their plan, and that then really sends a message to people that they're serious.
No, not a dollar figure, because you can't in an emergency. We know it's going to be large. We know it's going to take a huge human element. Lots of additional police, lots of children's services workers, and that is not short term, that is long term.
I'm hoping that they will have a clearer plan, but they have to do it with real respect to Indigenous people, and also work in real partnership with Indigenous people on the community and the Northern Territory government. This is vital.
The debate goes on. While the process of policy implementation continues to be a sticking point, most welcome this long overdue action taken.
I think it's a real opportunity now for the Indigenous people to try and get a better future for our children. We do have a river of grog, and there is abuse against children.
Grog, or alcohol, is a severe problem. This dried up riverbed in Alice Springs shows exactly why it's so difficult to keep the river of grog dry. Because even when alcohol is banned in so many of the Aboriginal communities around here, it's easy and common for their people to come to this town, get some beer and spend the night here. These homeless people have been camping here for years, they said, surviving on welfare handouts.
I save $100 for food and I spent $80 for beer.
Life is one long road now.
We did have enough to eat, we did have enough to drink, and we didn't have drugs and alcohol in our life. And we need help and more resources to be able to set up healing places. The record of the past, paternalistic treatment. You do aim for the day and the hope the days would come when you can look after yourself and look after others of your family.
And see the trail lead on.
Well, I'm joined in the studio in Kuala Lumpur by Warren Mundine, who's the former national president of the Australian Labor Party and the first Indigenous Australian to serve as a president of an Australian political party. From Tasmania, I'm joined by Michael Mansell, a lawyer and Aboriginal activist, and from Perth by Gerard Henderson, a newspaper columnist for the Sydney Morning Herald and executive director of the Sydney Institute, a conservative think tank. Gentlemen, thank you all very much indeed for joining me today. Let me begin by trying to understand what is going on here in Australia. We had the issuance of a report from the Northern Territory, a board of inquiry into the protection of Aboriginal children from sexual abuse, which seems like an extremely focused point and report. And Warren, let me begin by asking you, from that point of very fine focus, this has developed into an enormous, broad social and cultural phenomenon. Are we talking about sexual abuse of children, or are we talking about attacking the entire 200-year history of relations between the Indigenous community and the others?
I think to deal with the issue of sexual abuse, you've got to deal with all the other issues. You're dealing with law and order, and once you start looking at law and order and health, then you start looking at all the other issues start coming on board. And that's what you've got to deal with. You've got to start dealing with all those issues, otherwise you don't move forward.
I mean, it looks very much like chicken and egg. Gerard Henderson, are we not using this issue to actually try and introduce a much broader agenda? After all, the sexual abuse problem is a symptom. It's not a cause. Attacking the symptom is not exactly going to help. What exactly is going on?
Well, what exactly is going on is that the federal government decided, after many urgings, that it was going to act in relation to a very serious report that underlined considerable evidence of child sexual abuse in the Northern Territory of Aboriginal children by Indigenous men and by some white man working in mining
let me stop you there
areas.
Let me stop you there and bring in Michael Mansell if I could. Because if the situation, Michael Mansell, is that John Howard is responding to a report that talks about the serious problem of child sexual abuse, do you think the way he's gone about it is the right way?
No, the report that John Howard relied on stated very clearly that if there was going to be any change made, it had to involve Aboriginal people running the show. In other words, if the federal government or any other government was going to intervene, they had to work with the people. That's not what John Howard's doing. He's bringing in the army, he's bringing in the police, he's imposing his will and his ideas on Aboriginal people. And look, it would be naive to believe this is really about helping the children. This really is about an election of a man who's trailing in the polls and could be voted out later this year unless he does something.
We'll get onto the election issue in just a minute, but Warren, let me address the point that Michael made, and that is that the report itself speaks specifically, and indeed the opening paragraph of the report says, and I'll read it to you, in the first recommendation, we have specifically referred to the critical importance of governments committing to genuine consultation with the Aboriginal people. And throughout the whole series of recommendations that this report makes, one theme that runs through it very, very clearly is that this cannot be achieved without the cooperation and the help of the Aboriginal community. Now, is John Howard's approach taking notice of that desire?
I think it is, because you look at the troops that went in, that it's the North Force. North Force is a 50% Aboriginal military force. They're people from the Northern Territories. They know these communities. They have communications with these communities. Some of the sergeants, the officers in this force are Aboriginals, and they know how to deal with these communities. One of the things we've got to get corrected in this argument about this consultation process. One is that, yes, you do need to work with people on the ground, you do need to work with the victims, you do need to work with the children and the parents and the families and win their confidence in regard to the health checks, in regard to gathering evidence, in regard to a wide range of other activities that need to be done. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to talk to certain members in the leadership. All right, because, and I say this, let's be honest about this, the scale of this sexual abuse, people had to turn a blind eye to these things. People had to let these things fester on. So you've got to go straight to the grassroots and work with the grassroots.
All right, very quickly before we go to the break, let me pick up on one phrase that you used there and put it to Gerard Henderson. The phrase was the agreement of the community. It doesn't matter if you're talking to specific leaders or not, but the fact is if you don't have the backing and the support of the community, then it's going nowhere. And it seems from the film that we saw and from the reaction we've seen from the whole of Australia that the agreement of the community is very, very conspicuously lacking here.
Well, there are communities in the Northern Territory. The police who are there mainly for communications and transport reasons. I'm sorry, the army that's mainly there for communication and transport reasons, and the police have been welcomed by many members of the communities. Other people oppose it. I mean, the communities are divided. But by and large, I think the initiative so far has been welcomed on the ground for the most part, with some critics.
All right, we're going to have to pause for a couple of minutes. Coming up on 101 East, more on this controversial debate. Plus, we'll take a look at the daily challenges faced by one healthcare worker in an Aboriginal community. Do stay with us.